Hey folks, so today we're going to take a look at quadrilaterals and how to classify them. Quadrilaterals, I hope you know, are four-sided figures. The prefix quad, of course, means four. So we're going to look at some common quadrilaterals and how they are classified. If you'll take a look at my nifty chart, I have the five most basic quadrilaterals. We've got the parallelogram, the rhombus, the rectangle, the square, and the trapezoid. And we have a list of criteria that each of these shapes must meet. So let's start with parallelogram, which is the most basic of the quadrilaterals. Here's a drawing of a common parallelogram, and it only really has two criteria it has to meet. The first one being that it has to have two pairs of parallel sides. Parallel is a word that means that they're like running next to each other and they will never intersect. So this side here is parallel with this side here, even though my lines aren't. That parallelogram's lines are. Then this side is parallel with this side. So there you go, two sets of parallel lines. All right. The next requirement that a parallelogram has to meet, that's a hard word to say, parallelogram, all right, is that the opposite sides have to be congruent. So let's take a look. This side is congruent to this side, and that side is congruent to that side. All right, check. This shape meets both criteria for being a parallelogram. Okay. Moving on to a rhombus. This is a rhombus. Kind of looks similar to the parallelogram in that it sort of looks like a squished box, you know? All right, it's a little bit more specific than a parallelogram. Actually, an interesting thing about quadrilaterals is that some quadrilaterals can be classified as like many different quadrilaterals. What I mean by that is, like, take the rhombus. The rhombus has these three criteria, which we'll talk about in a second. But what you may notice is that the rhombus is also going to meet the requirements to be a parallelogram. Therefore, a rhombus is also a parallelogram. It's just a more specific type of parallelogram, and we'll take a look at that. So first, again, it needs two pairs of parallel sides, which it has here and here. All right, if we kind of skip ahead, it also has to have opposite sides being congruent. This side is congruent to this side, and this side is congruent to this side. All right, notice how I made the same identification, the same mark on all four sides. Well, that's the third criteria for a rhombus. All four sides have to be congruent, which a rhombus meets. All right, that's what sets a rhombus apart from a parallelogram, is that all four sides have to be the same. All right. The fourth type of quadrilateral, which is one of the most common, is the rectangle. All right, now here's a picture of a rectangle, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it. A rectangle, as you can see, also meets the criteria for a parallelogram. So a rectangle is also a parallelogram, but it does not meet one of the criteria for a rhombus. So it is not a type of rhombus. Let's take a look at the criteria it does meet. First of all, we have two parallel sides. This side is parallel to this side, and this side is parallel to this side. We also have opposite sides being congruent. So that side is congruent to that side, and this side is congruent to this side. But as you can see, all four sides are not congruent, which means that it is not a rhombus, right? This side is different than this side. The third criteria that a rectangle has to meet is that all of its angles have to be 90 degrees. And we have that in this rectangle. All four angles are right angles. They are all 90 degrees. All right, so that's what sets the rectangle apart from the parallelogram and from the rhombus. Okay. The fourth type of quadrilateral is the most common type of quadrilateral. It's the one most people are familiar with. It's also one of the most um, mistakenly identified. This is the square. The square is the most specific of the quadrilaterals. It has to meet the most criteria. So let's go through that. A square has to have two pairs of parallel sides, which this one does, here and here. A square also has to have all sides being congruent, meaning all four of its sides measure the same thing. All right? That also means that the opposite sides will be congruent. And it has to have four 90-degree angles. So the square has to meet all four of those criteria. Because it meets all four of those criteria, it also meets all the criteria to be a rectangle. So a square is a type of rectangle. It also meets all the criteria to be a rhombus. So square is also a type of rhombus. And it meets all the criteria to be a parallelogram. So the square is also a type of parallelogram. The square is actually all four or all three of those previous quadrilaterals rolled into one. All right. Now, the reason I said it's the most mistakenly identified is because a lot of people will look at a rectangle that's a little bit lopsided and like doesn't have congruent sides, or they might look at a rhombus that doesn't have 90-degree angles, and they'll just say, oh, it's a square, because a square is the most common quadrilateral that most people are familiar with. All right, but a square has to be very specific. Okay, now the fifth type of quadrilateral, it's kind of the black sheep of the quadrilateral family. It does not meet any of the criteria for any of the other quadrilaterals, and in fact, it meets a criteria that none of the other quadrilaterals meet, and that is that it only has one pair of parallel sides. So in this trapezoid, that would be these two sides here. That's it. That's all you need for a trapezoid. One and only one pair of parallel sides. The size of the angles don't matter. All right? Sides being congruent, it doesn't matter. It just needs parallel sides. One pair. All right, I've got a few other notes that we need to be aware of over here. Sometimes a quadrilateral will fit into more than one category, and I've kind of covered that here. You need to know what a regular polygon is, and those are polygons that can be categorized, polygons that would fit into one of these categories. And you need to know what an irregular polygon is, and that would be a polygon that cannot be categorized. It doesn't really meet any of the criteria to be given a specific name, and it's all wonky and weird looking. All right, I'm going to clear this ink, and we are going to identify a couple quadrilaterals. And I'm just going to abbreviate. This quadrilateral, all right, has a pair of parallel sides and another pair of parallel sides. It has this side congruent to this side and this side congruent to this side, and it has four 90-degree angles, making it a rectangle. This quadrilateral down here has a pair of parallel sides and another pair of parallel sides. Its opposite sides are congruent, but its angles are not 90-degree angles. That makes this a parallelogram. This shape right here has a pair of parallel sides, another pair of parallel sides, and all four of the sides are congruent. That makes it a rhombus. This shape up here has parallel sides, another pair of parallel sides. All four sides are congruent, and all four angles are 90-degree angles. That makes this a square. And our final quadrilateral has only one pair of parallel sides. We can say nothing about the angles or any congruent sides. That makes this a trapezoid. Okay? I hope that you learned something about quadrilaterals, and I hope that this info comes in handy. Thank you very much.